With the most recent release of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero being a huge success, it had me thinking about the other fighting games. More specifically, it had me thinking on why these games aren't more popular, especially with them having such a dedicated fan base as it is. Because let's face it, these games can be pretty freaking fun. How's it going, everybody? I'm CloudRaids and welcome to the channel, where I talk about video games and everything surrounding them. Today's topic, kids, is, well, fighting games and why aren't they more popular? And I think I have a couple of reasons for this, but let's just get into the video. Now, fighting games have been around for a pretty long time, starting back on the arcades to now where you can just play them in your house. With some of the biggest fighting games being Tekken, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, and even Super Smash Bros., you could argue that these games are very well known. And a lot of these times, these games are also very well made. But for some reason, I just don't see a lot of people talking about them. Compare that to when you see Call of Duty, you see it everywhere. Or when you see Fortnite, you see it everywhere. And I would argue that a lot of these fighter games are a lot better than Call of Duty or arguably Fortnite. So it's definitely not the quality of the games, so what could it be? And I think that one of the biggest reasons is that these games are very mentally exhausting. Compare that to a shooter game where you can just turn your brain off and shoot stuff. Fighter games, you have to be on your toes 24/7, constantly using your brain power because, let's face it, who wants to lose? And while myself, I do love a good fighting game, I know a lot of people when they get off work, they just don't want to have to use more brain power than they already have, especially to the extent that you do with these type of games. I would argue that fighting games as a whole are some of the most mentally exhausting games, because if you zone out for a second in the fight, you're probably just going to get your ass kicked, so you have to be focused in the entire time. And that's if you know how to play the game really well as it is. Maybe if you're better than me, you don't have to use your entire brain, but if I don't want to get comboed up, I really have to focus hard on what I'm doing. So the fact that I have to think so hard about what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, especially after having a long day, sometimes I just don't know if I can do it. And this really brings me into my second point, is the fact that these games have a really high learning curve and a really high barrier of entry. And I know that this single-handedly has probably turned a lot of people away from fighting games. People who probably would have loved these type of games, but it is a lot to understand. There is a whole bunch of stuff that you have to know before you can somewhat enjoy the games. If you weren't lucky like I was to have somebody teach you the ropes and have a friend that really enjoys these type of games, it can be very overwhelming to even try to start it off, because there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of details that you really have to know, whether that's your character or the other characters, that it's very easy to get overwhelmed and not even want to pick it up anymore. I think the MOBAs genre of video games is also having this same issue. Like League of Legends, for example, is the biggest game in the world, but even they're struggling to get new players into their game because there's such a high skill level to be able to actually understand the game, and the barrier for entry is just extremely high. You have to know so much before you can start to enjoy it and actually start to feel like you're getting good at the game. And I know it might sound kind of weird to compare those two genres, but if you think about it a little bit, while they are vastly different types of games, they both do have a lot of characters in those games, and you have to learn what each character does, more so in fighting games because there is a combo, and most of the time they are different for each character, and sometimes they have different abilities for each character. So you have to learn not only what your character does and how to perfect your character, but also what the other characters do, so you know how to counter that and you know how to play against that. And I know from first-hand experience, once you go down that rabbit hole and you really start to get into the game, figuring out what character does which and how to play that character and how to go against that character becomes part of the fun. But from an outside of view looking in, when there's 30 plus characters, 20 plus characters, it can be a little overwhelming, especially when you don't know where to start. And fighting games in particular can be very unforgiving. So to be able to get good enough to play online for any of these games, there's a lot of stuff that you have to know. And the fact that these games are so unforgiving can just make that experience 10 times more frustrating. The thing that I will give fighter games is that once you do go down that rabbit hole, they do get very addicting pretty fast. So once it gets you, it got you. But the hard part is trying to get new players to actually give it a shot. And I kind of tapped on this before in my video about the live service bloat, but even if you used to play some of these fighter games years ago, whether that was on an arcade or on your Xbox 360 or whatever it might be, the fundamentals of that game might still be the same, game, but almost everything else is completely different. And it is a double-edged sword because the players that have been playing for a while obviously want more stuff, but to a new player or a player that's coming back from a very long time might look at that and just think that it's a little too much for them. And I think another reason that these games struggle to get new players and to gain more popularity is because this genre does have a stigma behind it of it being somewhat toxic and very sweaty. Now, do I agree with that stigma? Well, that's a story for a different time. Whether it's true or not, it's still there. Plenty of games suffer from this. It's not just this type of genre. Once again, games like League and Rust both share this same stigma, and whether or not they deserve it, well, they do deserve it, let's be honest. But either way, those games are still pretty fun to play. But just the fact that there is that stigma has turned a lot of people away from even attempting to try the games out, combined with everything else that I just said before. Now, obviously, this isn't the #1 priority or the #1 issue, but this definitely doesn't help. There's been times where I've tried to get my friends to try certain fighter games, whether it was Super Smash Bros. Or Mortal Kombat, and they wouldn't even pick it up to give it a shot. Because the fact that there was a lot to learn, and they heard a lot of stuff about the community about it not being very noob friendly, I guess is the word you could call it, and it was extremely sad to see, because I can't force somebody to play the game, and whether or not you try to explain that this might or might not be as true as it seems, a bad stigma never really helps anything. A few bad apples can ruin the whole bunch, and I think that there's people who seem to be interested in these kind of games, but they feel like they don't have enough time in the day to learn these games at a fundamental level. And I think that the anime fighter games like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero or the Naruto Storm games were able to do it so successfully on a mainstream level and appeal to people who might not be huge fighter people is because they also have nostalgia on their side. And I'm not talking about Budokai Tenkaichi 3. I'm talking about people who have watched these animes, whether that be Dragon Ball or Naruto or any of the other ones out there, but they've watched these animes and maybe they just want to play as their favorite character. Now, the best way that I've found to get new players into the game, and my favorite way to play the game in all honesty, is just playing with your friends with an extra controller. That has always been the peak way for me to play any kind of fighting game. When you have somebody come over and you guys are just hanging out playing the fighting game together, especially if they're new, and this gives them a chance to like understand that it's not that scary. Dip your toes in the water, you might love it. Like I said before though, I love fighting games, and they're nowhere near being dead. They're always gonna have that existing fan base, and a very loyal fan base at that, but I also think that they should be a lot more popular than they are right now. They used to be huge, and I think that they should be huge again. I remember growing up on fighting games, and I've always loved them. But with all that being said, I'm CloudRaids, and this is my channel, which I guess means this was my video. So if you enjoyed it, maybe leave a like. If you loved it, possibly subscribe. If not, I get it, it's okay. But let me know down in the comments below what you guys think. Do you guys think these games are hyped up enough, or do you think that they deserve a lot more attention? Maybe you don't even like fighting games, who knows, but that's what I'm trying to figure out. Either way, I love you guys, y'all have a great day, and like always, I don't know what time it is there, so maybe have a great night too. Mwah.